We are here today with Ricky Williams. Yes, the Ricky Williams. One of the most iconic running backs, in my opinion, and probably a lot of people's opinions to ever play the game. Somebody who, he's laughing, but it's true from my perspective. And if somebody were to come to me with any number of football players who I watched growing up, my response to wanting to interview them might not be completely enthusiastic, just because, although I love football and I played football, if that's going to be the scope of the conversation, meh. However, Ricky is somebody who I always felt a connection to when I was growing up and watching him, as somebody who seemed to think differently, follow the beat of his own drummer to some degree, didn't use football to craft the entirety of his identity, and I think serves as a role model for a lot of people who play sports but also have more going on that they feel the need to express or seek. So with that being said, that's my short synopsis of how I sort of think about you and your unique place in football.
Yeah, I mean, I was laughing because the word iconic.
Yeah,
and I think it's difficult to be iconic if it's only about what you do on the field.
Right.
And I think of iconic athletes. I think right now in football, you got Tom Brady.
Yeah.
Who's been great for a long time. He's got like 6 Super Bowls. I think basketball, Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
And so for me, like, I've realized, I didn't have the desire and the kind of commitment to be a Tom Brady or a Michael Jordan just from what I did on the field. I had a lot of talent, but I saw my opportunity to be an icon was through using the platform that my athletic ability gave me to have a bigger message than just football. Yeah. And it's exactly like you said. I mean, if everyone, that recognizes me on the street only wants to come and talk to me about football, it's great, but it's a limited range of who I am and what's possible when two people interact with each other.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I do, when I think of the word icon, because I try to not use that term lightly. Everybody can't be an icon, and really, when I think of football players who I put in that category, even especially limited to like players who I actually watched in their heyday, very small number. Yeah. Barry Sanders comes to me, or Mike Allstott, as you're looking at his jersey out there, and that is kind of like, I was talking with Brendan the other day about how I'm never going to experience again like looking up to a football player. So you graduated in 99.
98.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're a few years older than me. Mm-hmm. I graduated in 01. So like it was right at the peak. I didn't play football. I didn't know or understand football until I was a freshman playing in high school. So like those first few years of watching and understanding the game because I'm playing it finally, that was probably the most intense, from a spectator's point of view that I'd ever been at a football. So you just happen to like coincide, with that time frame. But I think also, and I'm, saying all this because I'm talking to some younger guys. I'm like, I got Rick Williams on today. And they're like, who? And I'm like, oh, it hurts. Not that I couldn't give them an education on you, but somebody asked me, I was like, let's just say the University of Texas football field is named after him, right? So of all the players that went there, and I do think, although, you crushed all the records for yardage while you're there, it's not just about that, as you alluded to, and what really drew me to, because I remember watching you growing up and just seeing, it must have been snippets of your interviews, but I always felt like that would be a guy I'd want to talk to, which like, you're just not going to have that sensation talking to a pro athlete or like looking at a pro athlete on TV, even just because they may be dumbing themselves down to be diplomatic or saying the right thing because of the media coach. So I was like, this guy's not afraid to like just speak his mind, but not even in a like, I'm speaking my mind and I'm brash and I'm courting controversy. You just seemed reflective.
Yeah.
Would you say that's fair?
Oh yeah, it's fair. And that was my target. If someone said, when I was a kid, do you want to be famous? And I said yes, and they said why? And I'd say so I could have interesting conversations with people. Because if I'm being real, growing up in Southern California, being an African American male, it wasn't like everybody was open to just want to have an interaction with me. But I realized if I'm famous, then it kind of eliminates all the anxiety and stuff and makes it easier for people to want to interact and appreciate who I am.
Yeah. And that's a really interesting answer, because I think most kids at some point, or most humans, like fantasize about being famous. But if you were then to take it a step deeper and go, now, why do you want that?
Yeah.
That's a pretty unique answer. I feel like it's sincere, and I also feel like I can relate to it, because as I get a few Instagram followers, what I really enjoy about it is that people reach out to me, like from all over the country or the world, or I go with Brendan on tour and meet people who like know me there. So it's like I've got this tiny uptick, in notoriety compared to what you experience being like a literal global superstar. But that to me is one of the biggest perks, is like I get to connect with people who already have this common interest. Because if you're watching football, that's a common interest.
Yeah.
Or anything else that you're doing, you get to engage and sort of skip a little bit of the small talk. And I was going to ask you too, that reminds me, I know you've talked a lot about social anxiety and your diagnosis of that. It's something I think about a lot, like what that even means. You hear it quite a bit, and often from people who I feel like there are personality similarities to like the people I can think of who will claim to have social anxiety. And usually those people are perhaps more introverted, perhaps more thoughtful, perhaps don't enjoy small talk as much as in-depth conversations. So like I almost see it like in part is a deficit or an aversion to small talk, because if you just plant me in like, talk to 15 strangers, like I'd want to go and I would want to have a shortcut to the in-depth.
Yeah.
But the messing up the small talk would give me anxiety. So how would you describe social anxiety?
So, I obviously I spent a lot of time thinking about this. And first I want to start off with the idea of a diagnosis.
Yeah.
Is that the whole idea of a diagnosis is that so we know what we're talking about. Yeah. Diagnosis means to see through.
Yeah.
So it's to see clearly. And so when I got my diagnosis for social anxiety disorder, that's the way I saw it, is that, okay, I can identify what's going on, not so that I'm stuck with it, so that I can do something about it.
Right.
Okay. So if viewing a diagnosis that way, now we can break down social anxiety. Social means being around other people. Anxiety means I'm anxious. Okay.
Yeah.
So exactly what you said. Introverts, people that the word that I like to use, sensitive.
Yeah.
Sensitive. And sensitivity means you have an openness to something.
Right.
Okay. An openness to something. And so if I'm sensitive to, let's say I'm sensitive to pollen.
Yeah.
Okay. Then we say we have an allergy.
Right.
Okay. So I'm around pollen and I start sneezing. Okay. What do? I either take pills before I go around pollen, or I stay away from pollen, or I do something to take care of myself.
Yeah.
Okay. So social anxiety. I was in a social environment that gave me anxiety. The anxiety not being something inherently wrong with me, but being information about maybe I shouldn't be hanging around these people.
Right.
Maybe I'm being sensitive to people who are not in a position or have the ability to honor my sensitivity.
Right.
So the way I addressed it, social anxiety, is I started hanging around different people. Mm-hmm. And as I started doing that, I realized the anxiety went away. So it's information. Social anxiety is information. And if you're a sensitive person and you don't like small talk, don't hang around people that do like small talk. No, it's.
No, I agree.
It's simple. It really is.
I do agree.
It's like the same thing. My son has a lot of food allergies, and he learned early, right? The food that I'm allergic to, if I don't want to get sick, I don't eat it.
Yeah.
And I think we have to empower ourselves to recognize what is good for us and what is not. And I think the epidemic of anxiety is people don't take care of themselves. Mm-hmm. And for me, it was about, even though I was a big, tough football player and making a lot of money, being in an environment that wasn't very good to me, I had to make decisions to take care of myself.
Yeah, I really like the way you put that, and it makes me think about how I can meet a stranger and within 2 minutes, jump into something where if you're aligned, and I was trying to get you to take, I don't know if you've ever taken the Myers-Briggs personality test. You have. What is your...
I think I was the ENTJ.
Okay, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
INTJ.
Okay, that makes more sense. Just because ENTJs typically want to, like, they can't help but almost boss people around. Not even in a bad way. It's just like they'll come up with the idea and then want to implement it themselves. INTJs are kind of like, I'm going to do this by myself unless I have to.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But they're extremely competent. They're extremely, like, one of the nicknames is the mastermind or the architect. So they think through all these possibilities. Actually, my older brother is an INTJ, and he is such an amazing problem solver. He's like a math PhD, computer science guy. I visited him. He lives in Rhode Island. We went to Rhode Island this weekend on tour, and I surprised him. He didn't know I was coming, and I just showed up at his doorstep, and his reaction was like, "Oh wow, hey."
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like, fun, like, but maybe when I was younger, I'd go, your affect is like underwhelming. I need you to be, I need you to be the same as me, which I think a lot of people probably do. Like, why aren't you like me?
Yeah.
But as I've grown to love him and accept and understand him more, it's like I knew that was going to happen, whatever, and it's just part of him. And you want that kind of thing. Maybe it upsets you, like, oh, I wish you would have been like, oh wow. But in a crisis, or when shit hits the fan, he's going to be the guy who's still calm and going, yeah, you need to do X, Y, Z, and not losing his shit. Yeah. So maybe that's something you relate to.
That's beautiful. Just the idea. To me, it comes back to the idea of value. In my whole life, I've always wanted to provide value.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I wrestled with so much with football, because I was getting paid a lot of money and receiving a lot of attention, but ultimately the value I was delivering to people was more of a distraction.
Right. And I've heard you mention that before. I thought that was really interesting because, like, I think there's some core things, again, that I'll relate, and I'll try to not make this like, yeah, me too, but it's my way into understanding you. I do think about, the varying levels of creative output that I have, maybe. And I have things in mind where I'm like, I know, I have this thing in mind, and I know maybe doing a funny sketch or like a funny little thing, it's like, it's people like it and reward me for doing it, but I do have this desire to go deeper or like make a bigger impact. Yeah. And it's okay to strive for that. But with football, I think about what you emerged from and how, like, there are possibly the strongest incentives in the world to make you not think twice about what you're doing. Yeah. Because you have all the attention, adoration. You're an American male in society who really values a like football player who's the focal point of the attention you're being paid for. Like, you could find 10,000 people to surround yourself with who'd be like, you're doing everything right. Don't ever question what you're doing right now. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what made it tough. And in the context of being on the football team, I was definitely providing value to the team. Yeah. But I started, as I got older, what happens, started to mature. I started to think more than about myself. Yeah. Started to think about what impact am I having on my community. Yeah. And that's when I connected to, I said, if I really do the math, mainly I'm just distracting people, because even the things that I do have to offer that I think are of value, people, it's hard for them to receive it because I'm wearing a football helmet, because I'm in the guise of a football player. Yeah. And I didn't sit well with me. I realized I had so much more to offer the world from what I've learned as a football player than just scoring touchdowns. Yeah. And so I but I realized it didn't have the training and the experience of how to offer my skills other than as a football player. Yeah. So I became obsessed with learning. Yeah. And it was strange because, as a football player, I was the smart football player, but still, I didn't read. I didn't, Right. I didn't educate myself. I was just happened to be smart so I could pick things up. Mm-hmm. But to consciously say, this is an area of life where I'd like to know more, where I'd like to improve, and then to pursue that information. One, it was great for my confidence that I could acquire a different skill. Because I think that one of the hardest things for professional athletes or even collegiate athletes when they leave their sport is we've developed this to such a high level, and we've devoted so much time to this one thing. It's kind of daunting to think of I have to start over. Absolutely. And try to get to that level again. Yeah. But pursuing my educational interests really gave me the confidence that I could learn anything I wanted to learn, and I could become just as good at anything I was passionate about than I did at football.
Yeah. And you were in when you officially stopped playing, 2012 was it?
2012. Yeah.
So you were in your 30s, right?
Yep.
And that is a difficult time. Like, if you're going to pick up a new skill, you know, as time passes and as you sort of build your identity around other things, it does become more difficult, I think, to force it, or like just to accept the fact that you're going to suck at something for a while, or you're going to be a non-expert when, you know, you, especially a guy like you, where you've sort of achieved like the pinnacle of competence in some ways in your field. To reject that and start anew is daunting. But I was going to say, with regards to the schooling and the reading and stuff, and I think that's another thing that I relate to, where I was like, as a young boy, like I had to discover for myself that I really enjoyed reading the things that I wanted to read, because in school they're always telling you, read this book, and I'm like, this book bores me to tears. You can give me goosebumps or something, I'm going to read through or whatever, but like I think education should be geared towards almost like, if you're a young boy with a lot of energy, like read whatever you want as long as you're reading, because you get this in your head that like, oh, I don't like reading. Yeah. And then wait, the smart kid's reading, so I must be done, or whatever it is. But and I know you talked about like competing academically with other kids. Where you're like, I was in the advanced stuff until it kicked in where the other kids like had more resources than I did. Yeah. You know, because that's something that is, I think, one of the most obvious lasting, you know, systemic issues is like, and my mom was a teacher, so she saw, it's like, look, I teach 5th grade and most of the kids are like Mexicans with their parents don't speak English. Like, there is no help from the parents. They don't speak the language that the homework is in. So you're at a disadvantage. It's not the exact metaphor here for you, but
it's similar, but even deeper than that, and something that most people don't even acknowledge is like the cultural assumptions are different.
Yes.
Different cultural assumptions. And so it's when we're educated in this system, we're expected to ascribe to certain world paradigms about how the world works. And if you're from a different culture, there's not always a matchup. And I think in a negative sense, we don't have the help. In a positive sense, say like, growing up the way I did, I'm not bilingual, but I'm bicultural.
Yeah.
That I grew up in one culture, intermixed with another culture, and I have the ability to move between.
Yes.
And I think this is really the ultimate benefit of diversity.
Right.
Because you get people from different backgrounds, you get different ideas, it stimulates creativity.
Yeah. I always think about this because I would assume, like, the California accent is sort of like flat anyway, but like, I love accents. I love imitating accents. I like hearing people speak in an interesting way and trying to imitate it. But what I always think about is like, if you're from New York and you've got this like thick Long Island accent and you can't change that, it's almost like a cue. It's like, I'm stuck here and I don't have any choice but to speak like the people around me, in part. Then like, again, that sounds judgmental, but I always think about like this idea of, I moved around a lot as a kid too, so that was part of like seeing like, oh, here at this school, this thing's cool, and then a totally different thing is over here, and then like skateboarding's cool here, and rollerblading's cool here. It's all arbitrary. Yeah. You know what I mean? So there's not like any one thing that is right or wrong. You saw how, fickle things can be, and it just depends on where you are in the world that, as a 13-year-old, this is the most important thing to do or be or emulate, and you go a few hundred miles away and it's something totally different. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that opens up a whole different like avenue of conversation. It makes me think of, you mentioned Myers-Briggs.
Yes.
I'm really into astrology, and it's used in a similar way. And
that's why I brought it up, because archetypes.
Yes.
Like, and I know you're into mythology and storytelling. I see that as all related, like our human desire to see the world through archetypes rather than this person, this individual is pissing me off. It's like, well, what kind of personality is that? What are they? What might be the source of this conflict?
Yeah. So this is the idea of what I was saying earlier about value, is I think that each of the archetypes, right, are here for a reason, that they each have a certain value.
Yeah.
And if we can recognize and appreciate the value, then we know how to use it. But if we don't appreciate and recognize it, then we're going to misuse it. We're not going to be able to appreciate it, and we're going to have conflict and dis-ease with it.
And you've probably experienced this a lot too, because I think, so here's a fun fact about INTJs that maybe you know or maybe you don't, but they are overrepresented in movies as the villain.
Yeah.
because INTJs are seen as cold. On the scale, if you push some of your traits further and further, you'd get to a sociopath. Where like I'm an ENTP, and maybe the extreme version that's a narcissist.
Yeah.
You know, because if I have a good idea, I think it's amazing. Like I'm prone to being like, isn't this the greatest idea ever? And an INTJ stereotypes sort of like cold, calculating, which you want in some ways, and people will misread that. Like with my brother, it's like, you must not like me because you're not like exploding in tears upon seeing me, but that's not the case at all. So I feel like of the personality types, you might be one of the more misunderstood ones. And I know for me, there's certain personality types like an ESTJ, which is somebody who's like a bureaucratic, you know, rule enforcer, which we need, you know, but you think of a guy who's like really good at enforcing the rules in a sort of, you know, pre-existing hierarchy, where the ENTJ might like, he wants to create all the rules and implement them. The ESTJ is like, this, you know, pass me the codes and the rules and we're implementing it. I'm going to butt heads with that guy because I'm the kind of person who's like, well, those are the rules. Well, we could do it this way, and we could do it upside down and backwards.
So, you know, this idea of butting heads, can you imagine a situation where you guys could feed off of each other?
Right. And that's, I think, understanding archetypes, because that was like, when I'm in high school, I'd meet people like this and be like,
yes,
you know, F you, you're trying to boss me around or control me or make me feel stupid. Because, for example, like, I think each personality type has like go-to ways of using humor.
Yeah.
And a lot of ways that people use humor against me, sometimes like, oh my God, you're stupid. Or like, if I'm being silly, they're like, oh my God, you're so dumb or retarded, whatever it is. It's like, and then I'm like, well, no, I'm just being silly. I'm not being, but then you feel attacked, even though they're like, no, I'm just joking around. Or if they're telling you what to do, it's because they're uncomfortable with you like doing something unconventional, and it gives them anxiety.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so if you understand that, then you can be like, oh, right, you got a different brain than me, but you do a lot of things better than I do. And maybe I, you know, cover some of your deficits.
Yeah. Well, I'm very sensitive to worldviews, paradigms, and most people are not, because we're swimming in our paradigm, so it's difficult to have enough separation from it to perceive it. Yeah. And so this idea I mentioned earlier about being bicultural, the advantage is I can step away from my home culture and perceive it because I have another one to compare it to, and I can observe the majority culture of the West.
Yeah.
So it gives me a unique perspective to be able to give some kind of commentary on it. And first of all, to recognize it. And so this idea of deficiencies, what I'm good at, what I'm bad at, right? That's all part of a paradigm.
Yes.
You know, Rumi has a poem, you know, beyond ideas of right and wrong is a space, is a field. I'll meet you there.
Yeah.
Okay. That's another paradigm, more of a Eastern perspective.
Yeah.
Right? So for me, I think of going back to archetypes. All right. My understanding of archetypes, they're like the building blocks of the cosmos. Building blocks of the cosmos. And as humans, we are part of the cosmos. So the idea of the same building block, the idea that we are the microcosm and the macrocosm.
Yeah.
Okay. And the same energies we see in the universe are the same energies expressing through us.
Yes.
Okay. This idea. And so if we can appreciate in nature, I remember I was playing for the Ravens my last year, and I'd spent my whole career, grew up in San Diego, played at the University of Texas in Austin, and played in New Orleans, and then played in Miami, all south. So not really experiencing the seasons.
Yeah.
So I'm in Baltimore, and it's November outside, and I'm looking around. I remember the first month I got to Baltimore, it was in the summer. All the trees were green, the leaves were there, and I'm sitting there, and all the leaves are falling off the trees, and I'm watching the leaves, and I'm thinking, man, if these were humans, right, they'd be upset, they'd be pissed off, they'd be, you know, crying, thinking something was going wrong. But the trees are fine because they know in the spring the leaves are coming back. Yeah. Right? That if we just pay attention to nature, anything that arises in us is natural. Yeah. Natural. Okay? Yeah. And if we can find the correspondence in the world around us, it can help us understand and not freak out when things come up in our lives. Yeah. You know? And that the archetypes are part of a holistic system. And if we can recognize that harmony in nature, we can appreciate it inside of ourselves, and we can express that.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Meaning, like, when we say deficiencies or whatever, to me, it's not a deficiency. It's a misunderstanding of who we are.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm quick to use a word like that because, to this day, there are people making me like using words that might have a pejorative connotation to make me feel like something's wrong. And I also have the inner voice in my head saying, no, that's not a deficiency. Sometimes that wins and sometimes the other one wins. But there are definitely forces, as you're saying, in a culture that want to make something a particular quality or a focus on something that you're good at the expense of something else that somebody wants to go like, oh, you're bad at this. Like, well, I'm just not focusing, on this. But I do agree that I like thinking, you mentioned, the micro and the macro. I always think about fractals and the shape of things and like sort of the geometry of something. Like, and I think that's for stories too. It's almost like if you watch a really good movie, in every scene and every moment, there's like the shape of that movie that the whole scene is built on and the whole act is built on. And that's really like in nature, that's almost like one of these foundational things of like beauty is like a repeating pattern. And also I've noticed on psychedelic trips or whatever, like, if you take a bunch of LSD, it's like, what is beautiful about the thing that you have? If you were to have, describe it to somebody who's never taken psychedelics, when people would describe it to me before I'd taken it, I'm like, oh, it sounds like you're having hallucinations, which is actually not true in my experience. Like, you're not just seeing a random pink elephant in front of you that you think is there. It's like there's a psychedelic overlay, which means patterns of colors and shapes that are like moving in like a beautiful way. But it's like a pattern that and it's like, oh, that's why I like looking at that. It's beautiful and it looks like something that's cohesive. We can use the word psychedelic and it brings something to mind.
Even psychedelic, like this idea, and there's a movement going on in our country, and I think it's beautiful. Except for me, a psychedelic perspective is one where you don't necessarily need psychedelics to trigger. It really is what I think the way you described it is great. It's the ability to recognize patterns. Yeah. Patterns. And I think the thing about psychedelics is it loosens our grip on reality so that we have the ability to perceive more and more subtle patterns and patterns that exist that transcend our reason and our... Yeah,
because it is not just like... It's not just about seeing something. I always feel like, and I think this is backed up by science, like when they first started using LSD with like, guys trying to get a PhD in math and it would help them. I do feel like there is a term for it. Latent inhibition comes to mind, which I think like marijuana and psychedelics can like, it lowers your latent inhibition so that, these things, it's a necessity to survive that we tune out some things. And part of that's pattern recognition. Yeah. And I always feel like using, it can be a way into, and I think you've probably used this, but like with marijuana to like almost solve your own problems in some way or get the different perspective or whatever, because I've used marijuana a lot over the years, but it would always be something I mistake for like, oh, I like doing this with friends. And like, oh shit, no, I mostly like doing it by myself to kind of work through something. To see a pattern, to be removed from another influence and get a unique take. And is that how you used it over the years, or why do you keep coming back to that as a substance that you feel like is, beneficial to your life?
Because I feel like it does facilitate my ability to perceive patterns. Yeah. And I just want to, one of the patterns that we're most sensitive to perceiving is a pattern of dis-ease. Yeah. So someone says something that doesn't feel good to us. We're very good at recognizing those patterns. Yeah. And recognizing those patterns blinds us to recognizing other patterns. Right. Meaning there's certain subtle patterns that because of our training as a child, we were thought are taboo. Like the pattern of recognizing when I consume this, things make more sense to me. Yeah. Oh, there's some value here, but the pattern of this is wrong, you will get in trouble. Yes. That's drilled into us at a very young age. Yeah. And I think when psychedelics, cannabis, right, it unlocks those more superficial patterns and gives us access to the deeper patterns. Yeah. Okay, here's what I mean by that is, so in Ayurveda, we have this concept of Vrikriti and Prakriti. And the difference is Prakriti is our nature.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I'm talking to someone about their birth chart, I'm saying this is your birth chart. This is the pattern that you were born with, these ingrained patterns.
Yeah.
But it's nature versus nurture. This is your nature. But as soon as we're born, okay, our nature starts interacting with the environment, our parents, our culture, the time we live in, our siblings, right? All of that. And that becomes the nurture. And because of our nature interacting with this, we develop certain patterns, certain habits. Okay?
Yes.
And it's important to understand the distinction between our nature and what has been done to our nature since we were born. Because I think part of what the psychedelic revolution is giving us access to that deeper pattern, our nature, so that we can undo or unwind all of the ways we've been twisted by our upbringing.
Guys, first of all, thanks to everyone who shopped at Oak and Stone over the Black Friday sale, their most successful Black Friday sale ever. And you can still get stuff on the site using my discount code HELLA for 10% off. So right now I'm wearing this black short sleeve button up. You know, it's wintertime, so I'm showing you how I layer my Oak and Stone. I got the black on black with the red and black and the black Highsman beanie on. It all works, okay? I just saw a picture of myself with Ricky Williams, and the haters can't say anything about this outfit. So if you want to look like me and make Oak and Stone a foundational layer in your wardrobe selection for the day, go to oakandstoneclothing.com, use code HELLA for 10% off at checkout. Send me a pic of that fit, bro. You're probably wondering, Mark, you are so focused on this interview, asking such good questions of Ricky Williams. How you doing it? Well, the answer is simple. I use Happy Hippo Kratom. HappyHippo.com. I use promo code ThickBoy with 3 C's for 20% off for life. And this stuff, along with all this Highsman marijuana I'll be smoking later, keeps me fueled for these intense interactions. Yeah, and it is one of the things that I notice. For example, I might take LSD, and some of the things that I'll notice are like, I'm less concerned about wearing a shirt in a place that I might want to, right? So that's like one little, pattern of behavior. Certain conventions I will let go, and I feel like, as you say this, shame almost must be that has to be one of the biggest tools that people use to enforce taboos and societal conventions, versus
it's the way it manifests, but it's more of a function of feeling safe.
Yeah.
So in astrology we call it Saturn, but the idea of it's the survival mechanism.
Yeah.
And the research shows that the thing that a newborn needs more than anything is the love of some adult to make sure that they take care of the newborn.
Yeah.
And so doing what the people in charge tell you to do, right, is a survival mechanism.
Yeah.
And we need it to survive.
Yeah.
Right? So if we do something that the people in charge don't like, right, we learn to cut that shit out right away.
Yeah.
And we have to repress it. We have to push it down somewhere.
Right.
And so it becomes it manifests as shame, but it's really a survival mechanism.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've never heard somebody put it like that. But another thing that I'm thinking about as you say that is to truly unpack that. I mean, you got to go way back. You have to go back as far as you can recall to sort out the things that you had an instinct to do and somebody told you not to, and maybe that never gets resolved.
Not really. No,
Okay.
You don't have to go back at all because it's still living inside of us.
Right.
It's about recognizing the inner sensor. Right.
Yeah.
And it might be a parent, it might be a teacher, it might be society. It's to recognize that voice, right? Like the voice of I want to wear this shirt. No, you can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you have a choice. Do I listen to that voice? Does it have my best interest? Or would I really like to wear the shirt? And then you figure it out.
Yeah. And that is something I think about, the psychological process of somebody doing marijuana or psychedelics. And I know I've heard you say that you don't tell people to do it. You'll give your experience. You'll say, this is what I benefit from it. But I really related to that because I'm here to clear up any misconceptions about anything that I put in my body, and I've researched and become, at least, more expert on than I was before. I'm really never on a mission to try to get anybody to do it, but there are so many misconceptions about so many different things. And one of the things I notice is that, like, weed in California, for example, I remember like smoking a joint before going to see a movie, and I'm with some friends from out of town, and like we're in the car in the parking lot, and they're like paranoid, like looking. I'm like, oh, you guys like, we're in LA, and nobody gives a fuck. But that's a very common thing to like be an adult who's like, I'm breaking the law right now, oh my God, and like that's then going to color your entire experience. So the first step is almost like you have to get okay with yourself doing this, and understanding that like just because you have all these associations with it being a bad thing, or LSD is going to make you crazy or whatever. You have to unpack that first, because you don't, it's going to come up otherwise.
Yeah. And the nature of associations, and I mean, this is like the magic behind my brand Highsman, is the associations is how many other things in our lives do we truly like feel and want to express, but we hide.
Yeah.
And once you, at least for me, once I started to unlock the cannabis part, and not mine unfolded in, the national stage.
Yeah.
And the beauty of it was it forced me to look at all, not all of them because there are so many, but the multiple ways I was hiding parts of myself.
Yeah.
And it encouraged me not to hide those parts of myself anymore.
Right.
And there's something hugely liberating about it.
Absolutely. And because I assume that when you would smoke or consume cannabis in any way, like you would come back to that thought, like about because like I know I've been stuck on certain things, like I'll smoke like to like relax at night or something, and then I'm like, I'm coming back to this like conflict that like I know I need to take care of this because I'll suppress it, and then it comes right back up, and I'm very clear on what the emotion is that I'm getting from thinking about that. And did you feel like that was something you experienced?
So, to speak directly to the question around cannabis, yeah. I say it's a tool for attending to my mental health.
Yeah.
And so how I describe mental health, one of the things I know about mental is referring to what's going on in here. Mm-hmm. And I know if I'm out in the world and I'm too worried about what's going on out there, I'm not attending to what's going on in here. And I notice at the end of the day, when I sit and roll my joint and smoke, I become aware of what's going on in here. And that gives me the ability to attend to it.
Yeah.
And like you said, I'm recognizing there's something that I've been repressing because it's getting in the way of what I'm doing out here that I need to attend to. Yeah. Right. And I can pay attention to when it comes up, and attend to it, or I can push it back down. Yeah. And my message with people is, our tagline is spark greatness for two reasons. One, if you're hiding who you really are, you're never going to manifest. You're never going to express your greatness. Yeah. And so getting out of all the justifications we have for hiding who we really are, destroying all of those, that's the key thing. But how do we even get access to those? Right? For me, when I consume, I get access to these things that I've been burying. They come to the surface. And with the right intention and the right attitude, I'm empowered to deal with them, to do something with them. And the other part about it is a lot of times when we consume, because we transcend and rise above the bullshit, we have access to brilliant ideas that are floating in the ethers, waiting for someone to grab a hold and make them real in the world. Yeah. And so telling people, like, when you consume and you get ideas, not all of the ideas are going to be great, but there's some there. Write them down and commit to, the next morning when you wake up to do something about those things.
Right. And that's the key balance. And I think, so you're a great example of this. Joe Rogan talks about this. I would feel self-conscious because I do totally relate to that statement. But like, anytime I hear somebody else being like, I use pot to do this, it's like, okay, that's cool. Like if it's that one part of it or whatever, if it's part of your process, and it's not, that's not the only way I think to go about those things, as I'm sure, you'd also offer that disclaimer. But I totally agree that it's like, this can be something that's provides that spark, as you would say, and can allow you to, because I always like marijuana, the recurring thing that I'll come back to it for is just being alone and thinking of something that I know I wasn't going to think of before, and capturing that idea diligently and returning to it. But without capturing it or returning to it, it's just remains in the ether.
Yes, exactly. Then I'd say that's destructive. That's misusing, wasting the opportunity.
Yeah.
You know, because I say cannabis is the great escape. You know,
Yeah.
right? And not to make escape a negative thing, because sometimes we're stuck in a prison and we need to escape. Okay, but the thing is, when you escape, are you escaping to run away from something? Because if you do, when you come back, right, it's still there. Are you escaping to receive inspiration? And if you're escaping to receive inspiration, when you come back, bring that inspiration with you, because it's there for a reason. You know, it's like I tell the guys, like if we're stuck on a problem in the business, you know, I say like smoke on it. Right? Like do everything you can to gather as much information, gather the facts.
Yeah.
Okay. And then allow your unconscious to do the integration. Because our conscious mind is wonderful at gathering facts, but it can't reorganize them in a new way. It can only gather the facts. The deeper parts of ourselves, our intuition, our unconscious, that's where all the integration work is done.
Yeah.
And it's so hard in the Western mind to shut off the objective mind, you know? I think so, therefore I am. Like, that's got us stuck in this paradigm, in this pattern that the mind can figure everything out. It can't.
Yeah.
It can gather all the data, but the integration comes from something deeper inside of us. And I think, you know, cannabis is medicine. I think it's treating something that we're all dealing with, is the overactivity of our objective conscious mind.
Yeah.
And we need that balance. And I think hopefully as we integrate, we internalize our experiences with psychedelics, you know, we open it up so the next generation and the generation after that, they don't need these substances to be able to create the balance. It's inherent in it because we nurture that and we pass that on to the younger people.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. And, you know, part of that is speaking about, you know, like, because that was my read on things I've heard you say before, is that you see this as a tool. It's not the be all end all. And I always bristle at people who kind of present marijuana as like, this is the magical thing and you need to try it and this is going to solve all your problems. And some people kind of, I'm not quoting, but it's like they give that energy of like, this is what you need. And I like that you're have this grounded take on like, yes, ideally the future generations wouldn't be using this, but we're still going for that same thing, which I believe is, you know, part of your message is like finding meaning, purpose, individuality, you know, that has to come from you, because ultimately, you know, especially as a man, like you have to find your purpose and build your value, you know? Yeah,
but the main thing I think sometimes it gets lost is that story doesn't exist separate from everything else around us, that it's all together. Like who I am and why I'm born at this moment in this time is not accidental.
Yeah.
You know, that my work is to uncover and express my essence because the world needs it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been born.
Yeah.
You know, that's why this idea of deficiency, if I'm experiencing a deficiency, it's just like social anxiety, it means that I'm in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Because when you're in the right place, okay, even if you experience a deficiency, being in the right place is the place that can fill it, right? If I'm hungry and there's a refrigerator full of food in front of me, I'm in a good place.
Yeah.
Right? If I'm starving and I have no money and there's no food around me, right, I'm in the wrong place.
Yeah. No, that's a really great analogy that I never thought of, where it's like look at the emotion, because hunger is ultimately like it's a sensation. I assume it could be considered an emotion just because it's a feeling inside your body, you know, and you could probably
it's the definition of an emotion. Emotion means something that puts you into motion, and when you're hungry, the point of being hungry is telling your body, like, I have a need, like, go fill it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And so with anxiety or whatever. And I like also that you're framing it with all this stuff, because you do hear when people tell you their things, their issues, like, we do often hear about it as an excuse. I can't come to this thing because I have social anxiety and I want sympathy, and I'm not saying that instinct is inherently bad, but I think ultimately you have to at some point frame it in terms of what can I do about it? I'm not a victim of this. It's information, and information is neutral rather than, you know, a deficit or a mental illness, or, you know, however we use those words, it can be colored in a different way.
I think ultimately the way I look at it, pain and pleasure, comfort, discomfort are information. They're not it's not punishment or reward.
Yeah.
Something feels good, it means, okay, it's good for me. I'll keep going until it stops feeling good. Something doesn't feel good, right? Maybe this isn't for me.
Yeah. And I'm going to connect this to what you said about different being bicultural and seeing different cultures. I always think about this with regards to, like, if you're engaging in a political discussion or discussion about religion, which, you know, I love to do that. It's just not everybody is equipped to do that in the same way that I am, because I've done the work to detach my emotions from having that conversation and having my own set of beliefs criticized. And I think that's like, if you have multiple cultures you've experienced, you're less likely to sort of be defensive or get emotional if you perceive an attack, you know, on your own culture or beliefs or whatever. So would you say part of, you know, seeing things in a neutral information-based way is like learning to detach from like your identity being connected to this thing?
Kinda, but I think it's important that your identity is connected, just not overly connected.
Right.
Like, for instance, if I experience someone attacking my beliefs, I don't get defensive. I experience it as them attacking my beliefs, and I become curious of, what's so like, and I'll say like, is there something? Is there like what's coming up for you, or is like, did that trigger something?
Right.
Because to me, if someone is getting emotional, I feel the best I can do is reflect that emotion back to them so that they can handle it. If I take it on, they can't handle their emotion. It turns into an argument.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what I try. Actually, if I engage with people online, like one of my favorite, you know, like little tactics to do is point out what the other person seems to be, just even if you describe what they're doing. Because if some people will attack you, and I'll just be like, hey, I can see like you're a grown adult man who's typed my name into the search bar to come tell me that my face is ugly, or, you know, whatever it is. Like, just put it in super blunt terms, and then like force them to sort of give an accounting of like, hey, and why are you doing that?
Yeah. So, but the idea of force, you know, just I'm stickler for words.
Of course,
that's an interaction. The way I would approach that is I would honor what they are expressing. Mm-hmm. You know, because usually when someone is fighting for their perspective, they have a valid perspective, but what they're not acknowledging, that's where the miss is. Yeah. And so I'll acknowledge, like someone says, you know, you're ugly. I'll say, you're right. That crosses my mind at least 20 times a day. You know, and then they'll laugh. They'll laugh. And then they'll say, I was just kidding.
Right.
100% of the time it happens.
Yeah, because my rebuttal is never like, I'm handsome. You know what I mean? It's like, I want to know why you feel like that's a good approach to interacting with people.
They're not trying to interact. They're trying to they're trying to express something. Yeah. And, you know, I realized the idea of getting people to like me in a way where I'm not sacrificing who I am is just honoring their right to express what they need to express. Yeah. And when I do that, again, they apologize without even me asking for an apology. Yeah. Because they recognize, oh yeah, I just needed to get something off my chest. Why did I do it to them? My bad.
Right. I think that is a really interesting phenomenon. I've experienced that, you know, a handful of times, depending on the tack that I take. And even, you know, the name of this podcast, which is tongue-in-cheek, because I started captioning everything that I was posting with haters, will say, like, ironically, like, as a character of, like, because what comes to my mind is, like, somebody who's really self-involved, like, sees haters everywhere and sort of, like, almost like blames haters or the haters, like, and it's like, you know, it's a funny little thing I'm sure you've encountered too. Yeah. But, you know, when I started hanging out with Brendan, I inherited some of his actual, so I'm like, oh, now people are actually coming to my page to tell me how terrible I am at acting, or that I'm stupid and ugly and worthless and a pseudo-intellectual, like all these things, like a flood of actual harassment. And I'm like, but you got like, I like, this is a joke, and you guys are like telling me how stupid it is that I caption my things, like, while being the hater that I'm talking about that was imaginary before. Yeah. So, you know, but I do think, because the common wisdom too is like, when people shit on you, just ignore it or whatever. And I'm like, I don't like that. Like, I just don't, if that works for you, great. But I feel like it's one of these tropes that gets repeated, like, just block them, just ignore them. And you're describing a method of interacting with people because, like, you know, maybe we can get back to that, like, your experience of like being, because again, this is my version of this. I get a few people commenting on my page. You're a global celebrity doing things that seemingly would piss people off, or even, Casey, can we bring up the picture that I sent you? So here's something that I did for a sketch, right? And I saw you talk about your
wedding dress.
The wedding dress. And I remember that happening, but I hadn't heard you speak on it. So when I saw what you had to say, I was like, exactly. You were like, oh, I heard the idea and thought that's funny. But for example, this was for a TV show, and my other co-stars were African American, and a lot of African American males specifically will go, there's no way you're putting me in a dress because that means you're trying to emasculate me and make me like, there's this sort of like Dave Chappelle talked about it on Inside the Actor Studio. And I get that, I sympathize with it, because you're like, if you fear this thing, this backlash, and you're scared of that following you around because you put yourself in a dress one time, but like I look at it and go like, put me in if it's funny, like that's all I care about. And if you succumb to somebody like the fear of that, it's almost like what else are you letting dictate, your impulses to like have fun or be silly?
Yeah.
And so what was the backlash like from that, or even like that period of your life when you had achieved this pinnacle of notoriety? What did the backlash look like, and was this surprising, and how did you deal with it?
The surprising was surprising because I was young and naive.
Yeah.
And also, and I don't even mean that as a negative thing.
Yeah.
In that naivete, it was this idea of what is the purpose of fame?
Yeah.
Is what this lesson, this cover taught me this very well. It's to realize when you're a public figure, you're going to impact a lot of people. Yeah. And you can either shy away from it and be afraid of it, or you can utilize it.
Yeah. And
I got to the point where I realized I'm gonna utilize it.
Yeah.
And I don't take it personally. I realize that I'm a symbol. And so taking conscious ownership of that symbol, what would I like to symbolize? And that's what I use to filter all of my, not all of them, but a large majority of my responses. Is one of the things I want people when they interact with me to have an interaction that they've never ever had before. Is that when they walk away from talking to me, meeting me, is they're having thoughts run through their mind that have never run through their mind before. That's fruitful.
Yeah.
It's gonna feed, it's gonna nurture something in their mind that hasn't been nurtured. And I think the greatest gift I can give to someone is say something to them or show them something they've never seen before.
Yeah.
That's new information. Again, it's gonna stimulate the mind. And so, and I've put so much intention into that idea that it overrides any kind of personal hurt. Because it's not about me. It's about the difference that I have the ability to make. And I know even the temporary discomfort I feel when I see the bigger impact that I made, it overcomes that feeling.
Yeah.
And it turns into a positive thing.
Yeah.
So now I positively embrace the haters because it's an opportunity to give someone a different experience. The reason haters are the way they are is because they've had a certain habitual pattern of response. And I know that by giving them a different response, it's the best opportunity to unlock that pattern of hating. Because we've all been trained to be haters. All of our parents hated on us. That's.
No, I agree. Like if you can't like look at yourself and acknowledge like, I have been a hater before. I've had an energy that I later look back and I'm like, man, that was sort of excessively critical, or that thing that you said to that person really wasn't about them. It was about your emotions at the time, and jealousy, bitterness, anger at something, else, or them, there's, it's always a reflection of something else. But, being on the receiving end of it, at first, at least, it can be very confusing, and you don't know how to you got this wound and you're like, oh my God, I better take care of this bleeding. I can't even think about why'd you say that,
Yeah.
But if you're inoculated enough to those experiences, I think you can learn. But so if you've never had somebody shit on you on the internet or talk shit to you in person, the first time it happens, I think for a lot of people it's it's stressful, and it's surprising, and I like the fact that I've sort of been slowly inoculated this.
It's great training, I think life is training. And so anyone that has to deal with fame, it's the training to be able to to claim who you are. Because so many people, they get fame and they have all the expectations of other people. Yeah. Right. I think that's why a lot of people fall, because they lose sight of who they are and what's important to them, because the sheer volume of other people's expectations is so heavy. But when you can learn who you truly are and you can still hear that silent whisper through all of the expectations, that's when you can actually truly provide value with the platform.
Yeah.
But it requires training to build that muscle to be able to withstand all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know you've used that word whisper before. And this really resonated with me because I do feel like, I think about, I have cats and like they get active at night when it's most quiet because like, why is that? Like, well, that's when you can hear a mouse or like you're listening to the faintest sounds and that activates you the most. And so like if I'm up late doing something, I know that part of the appeal at least is like the general silence of something. And then you can hear without things pulling you away, noise wise or visually, you can hear these whispers. And I think that was just a resonant idea when I heard you talking about that, like for yourself. Because many people probably, I don't know, if you don't have that built in somewhere, you don't put that time aside, like you can never sort of be listening to your own whispers. Yeah. If you're keeping yourself busy, if you're never spending any alone time with yourself, reflecting, if you're just going from thing to thing and not checking in or assuming that like the voice you have to listen to is the loudest one.
Yeah.
Because that's how often we're to like by parenting, whatever. It's like, if I'm yelling, you got to listen right now.
Yeah. But even the whispers, I think the main training, and this is the whole point of meditation, is to train your ear to hear the whisper. Meditation, the mind gets distracted, you bring it back. Mind gets distracted, you bring it back. Eventually the habit, it stays there. And when it stays there, you can hear the whispers crystal clear. Mm-hmm. But the other part of it is hearing other people's whispers. Okay? Yeah. Meaning, or even when you're reading, you ever notice sometimes if your mind is distracted, you're trying to read and it's like, I can't read.
All the time. Yeah.
But when you're really tuned in, when you're reading, you're actually seeing things that are hidden in the words.
Right. Yeah.
That's the whispers of the reading.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also when you're talking to someone and, especially when they're yelling, they're yelling one thing, but you're picking up the energy of what they're really trying to say.
Yeah.
That's hearing the whispers too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's also something that, like, I wouldn't say that I'm the most naturally or empathetic person, but I do think it's a muscle that you can develop over time, because if you're in your own head a lot, like you're not spending a lot of time going like, just ask yourself the question, what would you be thinking and feeling if you were that person in that scenario? Yeah. And if you slowly build that muscle, then it can be more reflexive and intuitive. And some people probably need to be less empathetic because it's so naturally, like if you are a very sensitive person.
Especially if you're born with a penis, because the training is the women's job to be attentive to how we feel. It's not our job. Yeah. And so the training is to expect the women in our lives to take care of our feelings.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was going to ask you, like, because we've established that, like, and my read on you is the word, like you use the word sensitive about yourself, and I would agree. And it's also this thing in society that's like, some people still widely consider it a pejorative term, like, oh, you're fucking sensitive. But I've always felt like, yeah, in certain ways I am, sensitive to these experiences or whatever. And I know it's not a bad thing because most artists are sensitive, whatever. There's always this benefit to it, even though society can reward callousness. And I remember when I first started playing football, like I was a freshman and there was these guys, like seniors, and they would, like the hazing that went on, like you're getting thrown around, you're getting shit on. Like to me, it was like callous behavior, and it was rewarded because in that little hierarchy, you're going to raise to the top by like being a bully or being an asshole or whatever. And I always remember thinking like, these two things don't have to go hand in hand. Like you don't have to be an asshole to be good at football. And so I always made a point to be like, when I'm a senior, like I'm not going to turn around and haze, being like, be mean to them or like physically violent just for the sake of it. And I think you're sort of the ultimate paradigm of like this, you were a big bruising running back in this contact sport and you weren't afraid to block people, etc. So like nobody could accuse you of just being like, oh, I don't want contact as a skill player. But also, like that was secondary to you. Weren't playing football because you were like this aggressive guy who needed to physically harm people. You were
actually
just like,
I was.
Okay,
I was.
I was unaware of that.
Two things. I was, and I'll explain it differently.
Yeah.
But the one thing is, I think sensitivity is a pejorative word.
Yeah.
But it's about perspective. Like for me, my sensitivity is necessary for my happiness. If I'm not sensitive, I'm going to be miserable and cranky.
Yeah.
Okay. But to the people around me, my sensitivity is not a pleasant thing.
Right.
Because it forces them to be accountable for their part of the interaction.
Yeah.
You know? And if I just want to express something or I want to do something and someone is sensitive, then I have to like it causes me anguish because I have to modify my expression to take the other person's sensitivity into consideration.
Yeah. So yeah, you're right. Like that accusation in and of itself is a way to be like, I don't want to deal with your sensitivity right now. You're so sensitive.
Yeah.
It should sort of be a more neutral word, but it's a way of being like, how dare you point out that I was, you know.
But part of it is like, you know, what I've realized is it's up to me to decide the people that I spend my time around. And people who appreciate my sensitivity are the ones that I spend time around. Yeah. People who don't appreciate my sensitivity, part of my sensitivity in taking care of myself is I don't spend time around those people.
Right. And did that take you a long time to like drop the feeling of obligation to hang around those people? Okay.
It was really it was really easy because I prioritize feeling good.
Yeah.
And it's not a narcissistic idea. It's if I don't feel good, I have nothing good to offer anyone.
Right.
If I feel good, everyone around me is going to feel good because it's going to extend, it's going to come off of me.
Yeah.
And so people that appreciate my sensitivity, all of them are rewarded.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so it's me taking responsibility for my home life, my inner life by the people I keep in my inner circle.
Yeah. And do you mind elaborating on when you say, oh, in fact, I was drawn to football because of aggression or desire for violence or whatever?
Yes.
Because I'm really interested in that dichotomy, I guess, in you where you have that and you're excelling in this thing that, like, if you were to just sort of, you know, not looking, I'm just hearing you talk. I'm like, this doesn't sound like, you know, one of the most, awarded NFL running backs of all time, right?
Yeah.
Like those two things maybe people wouldn't assume exist in the same person.
Yeah. So back to the idea of archetypes.
Yeah.
Okay? So the way that Carl Jung thought about it, archetypes exist in the unconscious. And they're the batteries or the driving forces underneath all phenomena. All right? And so the beauty of astrology is it gives us it's an archetypal language. So when I'm talking to someone about their Mars, I'm talking about the archetype. The ancient Greeks called it Aries. Okay, Mars, what the Romans called it. It's our need to assert, to fight, to challenge, and to defend ourselves. Right? We all have it, all of us. Otherwise, we would get run over. We wouldn't exist. We wouldn't be able to survive. Yeah. And some people have that archetype in greater volume. Okay, they have a need for activity, competition. In my chart, in me, I have that archetype very strong. Right, the moon is what we've been talking about. Is the archetype of the mother, sensitivity, the need to nurture. I also have that archetype very strong. Yeah. And so this idea of two archetypes by their nature conflicting, very powerful in my unconscious. They both need to express themselves. The struggle I have in life is how do I express both of them? Right. The tendency is, you know, as a guy, you know, as an African-American male, right, who's pushed towards sports, right, I'm going to naturally gravitate more towards this one. So it's going to have easier expression. The more sensitive, nurturing side of myself, because of the way I look, doesn't get as much expression. But in order for me to be happy, I have to find a way to integrate those and express them. And so the way I would say it is, you know, you have a little kid who has a lot of energy and you know, gets in fights all the time. Put them in sports. It's an outlet for that archetype, not only to express itself, but to receive training so it learns to express itself constructively. You know, because the same energy of getting into a fight and being violent is the same energy of picking up that linebacker on the outside blitz or hitting the hole at the right time with enough energy to get into the end zone. Yeah. But it's a more constructive expression of that archetypal energy.
Yeah. I really like that.
And so when I'm talking to a woman and I see a woman with a strong Mars, the first thing I say is you were born at a disadvantage, you know, and I kind of laugh and say what I mean is, you know, is that our culture, you know, teaches that women aren't passionate, aren't lustful, aren't aggressive. And so all of the messages, most of them, unless your dad's a football coach, right? Most of the message that you're getting from the world is a part of you isn't allowed. And so how do you find a way to express that? Oh, you attract, you know, the bully football player, right? Because that's a way to express it in your life through relationships.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I really like that. And I think maybe think about how you could have a 50-50 mix between those things. Like they could exist equally in your body. But because if your incentive structure where it's like, oh, you're a big, strong black guy who runs super fast, like put all your energy into this. And I assumed that like for at least a decade or more, you were conscious of the other side being like held back and not having an outlet for expression, and that there was nobody like, did you have any friends that were looking at you going like, man, there's something else here that like you should like explore and express yourself outside of football?
I had a couple, but it was like the whisper, right?
Yeah.
A couple of them, but the voices from everyone else were so loud, it was hard to even recognize and acknowledge. And one of the things, we know about cannabis is we love the female plant. We love, because there is a feminine, reflective, right?
True.
You consume cannabis, you become more sensitive, right? You notice things in the music. You notice things in the food. You notice things in other people, right? That you didn't notice before. Why? Because you're more, the feminine side is more, the more sensitive, reflective side is turned on.
Yeah. I had never thought about it that way. And like with those terms, I would agree with everything you said. And I never thought about like the connection between the female flower and the veering into a feminine energy for the purpose of then reflecting at your own self from a distance more. But I do think that's a very accurate analogy. What do you got here for me? You want to open this up on camera? Allow me to?
Yeah, go open it. Yeah.
So, oh wow. So we have Helix. This is...
It's a one-hitter. It's a fancy one-hitter.
Nice. Yeah. I love these. There's we got post-game. And by the way, I love the branding of Highsman. I was hearing you talk about your, like the fact that you made your school email as a freshman, like Highsman 1995 or something.
It was Highsman at utexas.edu.
Okay.
Yeah.
This Highsman. He just called it, right?
Yeah.
So I don't feel like that's such a unique thing to be able to do. Like, you're the only, seemingly, obviously nobody else had taken that email. So,
yeah. Well, honestly, it was the joke I tell, and especially when I'm talking to younger people.
Yeah.
Joke I tell is I was in the computer lab, and the head of the computer lab said we need to create email addresses, and this was 1995, and I raised my hand and I said, "What's email?"
Yeah, I probably would have been around this, the same thing. It was like, 5 or 6 years later, like everybody had an email, but at that time you're like, what is this used for?
Even still, it was still AOL, so it was like, shh, you got mail.
Looking up porn and trying to hide the modem sounds. Like, what's going on up there? Nothing. This is all really cool, and I have smoked some of this already. I got a care package before, and I really enjoyed it. And, I really enjoyed our conversation today. I really hope that you can continue to serve as a role model, because I do think there are probably so many people in a position like yours, maybe not at the, the pinnacle of the sport, but like I know through the coaching that I've done, I love finding a guy who's like, oh, you're on the wrestling team, you're on the football team, and like something about what I'm doing connects, and you're like, oh, but I really want to, I want to make videos or whatever, do this thing. And I like, it's so meaningful to me to be able to like, you're like, oh, here, let me show you this, read this book, and try to put them on the path. And sometimes it does just take like that one interaction. I don't need to be your mentor for the rest of your life, but you can spark an idea or put somebody like onto something that has a lifelong impact.
Yes. Yeah. I was talking to my analyst yesterday, and we were talking about like the conversion moment. I grew up in a very Christian household, and like on the road to Damascus, and we all have this moment where something, I call it magical, something inexplicable shows up, and it's like proof that there's more to life than we've known, and it like sets us on this journey to figure it out. And that's what I want to be. I want to spark that moment for people where they realize there's a lot more going on. You could be the inciting incident. And I know in some of your interviews, this is something that I think about and talk about a lot, is like hand in hand with the Jungian stuff and the archetypes is story moments. And that, for example, you referenced, being in the belly of the whale as Jonah. And I do think that most people could benefit from learning more about story in general and what these, like, our
ancient stories and archetypes and all those things, because that helps you put your own, like, you figure out where you're at in the broader mythology.
Yes, that is it. That is it. That's it.
Because without that, it's like, oh my God, this is a crisis. But if you can have the perspective, like, no, this is this moment.
Yes.
And then you can see, well, I'm one beat away from.
That's it. We need that. Otherwise, we lose context. When I was in my darkest moment, after I retired the first time in 2004, I remember sitting there and then something hit me, like all the movies I watched. There's that point in the movie where the protagonist is like in the shit, but they're going to come out on the other side. Yeah. And I just realized I'm just in that moment in the shit.
Yeah.
And I connected to the story, and I had this faith that I'm going to come out on the other side.
Yeah.
And that gave me the ability to trust the process and just go for it.
Yeah. Because in that movie moment, it's really effective, that dark night of the soul. If you're watching and going, I don't know how he's going to get out of this. But there's always a way. It's like, but it's, you have to wait for like, oh no, if I put the ladder here and climb out of this pit, like it has to be something that's non-obvious. You have to feel like, this is it, I'm done, it's over. I reached for this goal, I overextended, I fell all the way down into the snake pit, and here I am, I'm going to die. Yeah. Like you should have that feel. Or like if you're watching a movie, it's not, the third act doesn't matter unless, if it's like, oh, I'm here, but here's the ladder and I can already get out. It's meaningless. So you really have to feel like, you're hopeless and in despair. Oh. And so hearing that, and that you had moments like that, and that you still were able to come out of it, you know what I mean? And find that happy ending, so to speak.
Yeah. The place in our brain that activates intuition is right next to the place that activates despair.
Interesting.
And so in the Christian myth, Jesus dies on the cross, he goes to hell, and then he ascends to heaven.
Yeah.
And we, in the common cliche, everyone wants to go to heaven, nobody wants to die. Right? It's just this moment where we embrace the dark side, right? We embrace it, and we like feel the gravity of the moment, and there's that space of there must be a way.
Yes.
That's the magic moment that opens the way.
Yeah. Well, I think that I don't want to keep too much of your time. I think that's a great place to end on, if you're okay with that.
Yes.
Yeah. No, because seriously, I think if people are watching that, like, I've talked about this before, when people are going through really dark times, and I've been there before, and if you don't have maybe that voice saying things like that, people get suicidal because they go, I don't see the way out. You know what I mean? And they don't know how to trust the process, or don't know how to go, well, I know where I am, and I have no hope, but maybe if I, continue searching for a solution, it'll come. And so I hope that, even just that will serve as an inspiration to somebody going through a really rough time where right now you feel like you can't find your way out of this abyss. But to know that other people have been there before, and you've been there on the biggest world stage and felt the depths of that and still emerge from it, I think that will be inspiring to many people.
Yep, that's it.
All right. Yep. Well, thank you again. It's great having you.
Yeah, this was great.
Talk to you again in the future, in the near future.
Yeah, I'll be around.
Part 2. Yeah.